I've been sitting with this question for a long time and beating myself up about it. So it was nice to bring it out. Almost kind of like hitting publish on the first episode of the podcast. Saying my problem out loud published the problem. Therefore, it could be worked on. When it's just sitting, worrying in your mind, it's the same as just envisioning something. But saying it out loud is like manifesting it. And then finally, you can work on it that way.
Welcome to Season 2 of the VIRIVERSE Live Podcast. Before we get into the conversation today, we invite you to join us for a mindful minute or two to aid the transition from whatever you were just doing into today's experience with our anonymous changemaker. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Chance here, also known as your designer, and we're so thrilled to welcome you into the VIRIVERSE Live Podcast. This is a place where changemakers come to unlock a balanced soul and scale their positive impact. In this second season of our podcast, we're very, very thrilled to be traveling to the moon of QSADA each week for the next 8 weeks, where one anonymous changemaker will explore a challenge to help them make a decision about something that's top of mind, and of course, help all of us craft a path to making decisions, exploring challenges, and making our positive impacts. And now I'd like to introduce our moon mentor and a dear friend to the VIRIVERSE, MCK, also known as the Present Squirrel. Welcome to his most special home, as the viridescent mothership leaves us all on the moon of QSADA.
Thanks, Chance. And hey, everyone, I'm MCK, aka the Present Squirrel. So Bounce is a tool created to help entrepreneurial changemakers like you to make better decisions faster without second guessing yourself, even if you're a chronic overthinker, which we can all tend to do from time to time. And so before we jump in, for those of you who have yet to experience Bounce, the anonymous changemaker and I are about to have a 20-minute conversation where they will be open and honest about a situation that's top of mind for them. I'll simply be a great listener and ask them a series of good questions. So in our audience today, we have a couple of other changemakers who will be observing the conversation and offering their best question at the end. So after today's event, all the insights you've put in will be shared with our anonymous changemaker to aid in their decision-making process. And without any further ado, let's get started. So, anonymous changemaker, you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. 1, 2, 3. What's on your mind?
All right. So my question that I want to dive into is, what is holding me back from moving forward with my circular economy consulting business?
And what do you think is holding you back?
Great first question. I think that it's fear of the fear of the immensity of how much I have to do. Am I capable of doing it? Will it be useful to everyone, to anyone? Yeah, it's a lot of fear and overwhelm with the number of tasks to take the next step.
So what are some of the things you're most overwhelmed by?
Well, what's funny is that I have done a lot of thinking about the next step and a lot of planning and a lot of writing. And so I know very clearly what the next step is. But yeah, I think that I'm just afraid of jumping in. Um, yeah. I guess with your question, will you repeat your question?
Well, I guess just moving on from there though, like, so what is the next step?
What is the next step? The next step is to actually create the educational content that I've meant to be creating. So my whole goal is to, educate individuals on their circular economy impact and how they can apply that to their lives. And so it's really writing a script on the educational content is the next step.
And what kind of things do you need to do to write that script?
I need to sit down and define time to do it and actually do it. And it sounds so simple. I do clearly know this next step, but every time I think about it, I have so much resistance.
Yeah. So what kind of resistance do you find coming up? I mean, I heard you say before, you have this fear, am I capable? Is this useful?
Yeah, I think that my fear is that when I go to write the script, I won't have enough openness and love and encouragement from myself, but I'll just be blocked by judgment. And then whatever I write down on the piece of paper will be filled with that judgment and will be filled with, all those negative emotions. And I won't be able to say what I really mean. I'm it's like compounding fear. I'm afraid of bringing the fear to the draft when I write it, and that through that, I won't be able to create what I'm really trying to say. It's like my channels are blocked.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What are okay, so it sounds like when you try to sit down to write, that's really difficult.
Mhm.
What are the scenarios where you feel like your channels are not blocked?
When when I'm planning to write. So, like for instance, I I've created a whole plan for the business based on my values, and from those values have created projects and KPIs and metrics. It's almost like planning to start the business is so easy for me. I
Yeah.
love the envisioning part of it and like what can this become, and oh, that's so cool, writing down, the vision is easy. I love imagining. It is the doing and it is creating the vision that is scary.
Yeah. What kind of things have you created before?
I created a podcast, and it really has taken a life of its own. I think thinking about my podcast is a really good comparison to this because I didn't know what I was doing with the podcast when I started, but I knew that I had to do it in order to improve. I knew that I had to publish in order to see what it would become. And the podcast has become something different and beautiful than I had ever expected. It took on a life of its own, and it was through doing that had to happen. And I am very aware that I have to draw that parallel with my own business, with just taking that first step and letting it become what it needs to become almost on its own.
What kind of resistance did you have with the podcast at the beginning?
Hmm, great question. So much, so much. Like I would listen to what was supposed to be the first episode and hear all of these flaws and inconsistencies and, oh, this part's boring and we mentioned this thing but we didn't really talk about it enough. And so I spent probably a month or more just trying to edit the first episode. And eventually I was like, you know what? I need to just publish this. And so I had somebody else edit it so that I would stop overthinking it. And I published it. And you know what? I got some criticism. And my response to the criticism was, I know this is flawed, and it took a lot of courage for me to publish it. And people completely changed tracks when I told them that. They said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I bet this was so hard. Like, good job." So I think that there's a lesson in that of sometimes it's good to take people's feedback when it's helpful. And sometimes it's time to just fail and make mistakes. And when people give you feedback, it's like, yep, got it. Like, I agree with you. And to improve through doing.
Super interesting. I mean, how did it evolve then? What episode on your podcast are you at this point?
We have almost 25 episodes now. We've been doing it for over a year. The way that it's changed is I used to just do episodes with my co-host, just her and I. And now we have guests. We're starting to have sponsorship for the show. We just have some amazing people. And actually somebody that we invited to be a guest said, "No, yeah, I know your podcast. I've been listening to it," which is crazy and so exciting because we kind of thought it was just our moms that were listening to it. So and we have a process for onboarding, new people to interview. We have marketing people. Like, it's just so cool what it's become. And I would have never been able to create that process or that quality or had people interested in sponsoring had I not published that very flawed first episode.
Yeah. So it took about a month for the first episode. How long did it take for the second one?
Well, by the time I was figuring out how to edit the first episode, we had been recording others. So by the time we were ready to publish the first episode, we had like 6 other episodes recorded. So I guess that's another kind of kudos to my co-host and I, is that we didn't stop. We put it on our calendar once a week. We were going to record, and no matter what, we recorded. We basically created the process as we were going. And I think that was a conscious decision we made. I was like, hey, we don't know XYZ. We don't know if this format works, etc. And it was just, well, we're going to record and we're going to learn from it. And if we record 5 episodes and realize we made this mistake, then so be it. So we kept going despite the imperfection and unfinishedness of the first episode.
So also curious, from sort of like talking about the idea to like recording that first episode with your co-host, how long did that process take?
The process from the idea to the actual recording?
Yeah.
Maybe a couple months, something like that. We would talk about it and then we would say, what's our first topic going to be? We did some research. Yeah, maybe a couple months. And then we had to figure out how to record. We didn't know what would record our audio. There was some research to be done. So yeah, probably right.
And so I guess, like, as we continue to sort of explore this parallel, how long have you been in this sort of like visionary planning, imagining mode for your business?
Yeah. A lot longer than a few months. Like, I founded the business in 2020. So well over a year.
Okay, got it. So we're just about 10 minutes right now. How is this conversation going, and how are you feeling?
Good. I'm already kind of starting to make some really good connections between, this project of unknown with the podcast and this project of unknown with my business. And I liked your question of how long did it take to prepare? Because that made me give a little grace to myself because kind of just like you can't make a plant grow faster than it's going to. You have to nurture it and take care of it, but you can't force something to grow faster than it's going to. So my business is much more complex and has bigger goals, or has, different goals. But I would say more complexity than the podcast. And maybe it's okay that it's taken more time to think about. But it's also time to move to the doing. But again, thank you for asking me the timing questions because it's allowing me to give myself some grace.
Yeah. So in terms of just getting to that doing, what do you think is the best way to do it?
I think probably taking the same approach as the podcast in that we had scheduled time to do it. And kind of no matter what, we knew that the doing was what was going to make it better and make it into its to create something that we never could have imagined. You have to do it. So I think scheduling that time, but here's the big challenge. When I schedule time with my co-host, I owe it to her to be there. And I owe it to her to have prepared, be ready. I don't have that same level of accountability. So if I put it on my calendar, what's keeping me from, cleaning the house? Because that suddenly looks really way better than working on my business.
So, I mean, I guess like the first question maybe is what's the best, like, what's a time where you usually feel good about doing work?
Nice. Usually the morning. I would say, once I've woken up and everything, I would say I'm the freshest in the morning. I have the best ideas in the morning.
Okay. So what time is that?
Like from 9 to 11 a.m., I would say are kind of my prime hours.
Okay. And I guess it sounds like having somebody that you do work with is helpful. To what extent do you need to be sort of like live and active with them? Or to what extent do you just need to be working with them or around them or somehow connected to them?
I don't know. I definitely get lost in projects where it's really nice to be working by myself. Like I definitely have those moments where I don't need somebody physically there. But what I do think that I need in terms of a person is that accountability or somebody to send projects to or send ideas to or occasionally bounce ideas off of. And you're making me realize that I have those people. I was working with two people who were helping me use design thinking to create this business. They would be people who I could be accountable to. Even if they don't read any of my scripts, I can, say, hey, I owe you a new script at 9 a.m. on Monday, every week, something like that. So I guess to answer your question, I don't need somebody present, but I do need some level of accountability from another person.
And, you brought up this question of just because you put it in your calendar, just because you say you're going to send it to somebody at 9 a.m. on Monday, what keeps you doing that as opposed to not?
That is the core question. That is the core question. Yeah, because at some point, my meetings with the design thinking team that was helping me build the business fell off. I ended up canceling the meetings because I couldn't deliver the next thing before our next meeting.
Mhm.
So, what was preventing me from actually doing it and delivering? Mm. Yeah, the enormity of the task. I think that I have a hard time sitting down and saying, all I have to do is spend an hour or 20 minutes even working on a script. It could be a bad script too. Just anything, just putting the time into it. I can't just think of that sole task. I think about, oh, but then how will I publish it? And how will people access it? And how will people pay? And how will this affect other people? And is this a waste of time? It's kind of like coming into a room and there's dust on the table. And suddenly when I see dust on the table, I see the whole room needs to be reorganized and repainted. And yeah, I have a hard time isolating one task.
Who in your life is really good at isolating tasks?
Probably my roommate. She is so driven and amazing, and she has the goal of becoming an astronaut or impacting the space community in some way. And she is so inspirational and very focused. So I would say she's somebody who can really just get things done.
And once you've isolated the task, I guess it comes back to this question: how do you make sure that you do it?
The tasks that get done are again for other people. So for work, for guests on the podcast, for my roommate, cleaning the house, that type of thing. That's how I make sure that tasks get done. Is that other people are relying on me for it. And being an entrepreneur, as I know several listening to this podcast can relate, how do I guess the question is, how do I make myself as important in my mind as the other people that I owe things to?
Hmm.
Maybe it's that I deep down don't think that this is as important as the other things. And it would be a really cool shift for me personally to give myself that value and permission that this is something that I owe myself. That's very interesting. Admittedly, I do struggle with that. Like, do I owe this to myself? It's like self-care. It's hard to prioritize. Fascinating.
So we are getting close to 20 minutes now. So based on what we've talked about, what would you like to do, or what would you like to try next?
Yeah, well, I love this place that we've come to, which is the question has shifted now for me, which is around how can I, what's holding me back from owing this to myself, or how can I rephrase this? The question now is, why don't I feel like I owe this to myself? Or what is it that I can change to increase that value, that doing something for myself is valuable and that it's worth the time? I can work on rephrasing that question, but I think I know where I'm getting at. And I love that because I really think it's the core of what's holding me back. And that focusing on, yes, I do deserve this, and I do deserve to create this business. It deserves my time, and I am valuable enough to owe it to. So what I want to do next is sit with that exploration of self-love and self-accountability. I think sitting with that will really help open the channels for me to actually do the next step.
Cool. Well, thank you for being so open and honest and for sharing your situation with me.
Thank you for asking such great questions. It was really a pleasure, and I do feel like I made it to the next step in this issue. So thank you so much.
Cool. So, hey, designer, I know you've been listening in along with a couple others in the Observer crew. So, what insights and what questions can we now offer our anonymous changemaker at this point in the conversation?
Yeah, thanks, MCK. What an interesting way to sit and listen to a conversation like this. I think it really, like, being here to just be of service and be of help brings some interesting insights and observations that we might not otherwise find. So what I picked up on is, kind of the core question that we kept circling around, and how our anonymous changemaker shared that, the vision part is easy. It's the doing that becomes the scary part. And I think both of those things, they're kind of separate, but obviously in this situation, they're connected. This idea of, like, what holds you back from spending the time, this, like, enormity of the task. Some of this stuff speaks so well to our audience, because sustainability champions in the spaces of climate change, inequity, conservation, activism, business, community development have great visions for what a better world looks like. But building it is intimidating and hard. It's really hard. So where it leads me, and the question that I would like to leave with our anonymous changemaker today, is if you were giving advice to another changemaker that's facing fear of bringing their vision to life, what would you say to them? What advice would you offer to them? And that is the question that I, the designer, would leave today. So now I'd like to throw it to one of our other observers in the audience, the researcher. Over to you. What did you find, and what is your question for today?
Yes, thank you. Wow, this was such a great conversation. It was so amazingly helpful to me personally. And then I can also see how, just to the greater community of people who are change makers trying to make a difference, I feel like this is just sort of a universal struggle that we all feel. I don't have a fully fledged question for our anonymous changemaker. I did feel like one thing that you said that really, like, got to me was that this feeling of, like, your internal state needs to be a certain way in order to move forward. Like, you can't have fear and move forward, because then you're bringing fear to your work and it's going to contaminate it somehow or come through somehow. And so maybe I would just invite you to explore that more. And maybe there's something in there, and I sense from kind of some of your aha moments during this that you're feeling that, like, oh, maybe this is about, like, self-love, self-acceptance, and self-compassion, that, kind of just accepting that you're on a journey, and no matter where you are, there's worthiness and value there, and you don't have to be perfect or be complete or be fear-free, that you can still move forward with those things, and that it will be okay, like you proved with your podcast.
It's fantastic. Okay, well, love to go back over to the present squirrel and have you put on the observer cap. What did you find?
Yeah, so I mean, I think probably one of my biggest takeaways from the conversation was that kind of that section around, like, being alone and recognizing, just sometimes how hard it feels, to be alone, as compared to when doing the podcast with the co-host. It's like, oh, we can do this together, and this is great. And so, yeah, I think that was kind of like, and of course, sort of like the other part of like, how do I make myself as important, as the other things? Because I think also too, it's so easy to do things for other people, especially when we want to be helpful and supportive and all the things. But yeah, how do we help and support ourselves to do the things that are ultimately helpful and supportive for other people too? The irony, of that. So one question that couldn't really fit in, it was kind of like circling my mind a little bit, but it didn't seem to be go with the flow. I was kind of wondering, with this podcast, it sounds like the podcast is something, that could also be helpful to make content. So to what way would either in bringing, like having the podcast be a vehicle to help in building out this program or business, whatever it happens to be? Or number two is, do you just use audio as a way to create the content that you're trying to create, because it's easier to talk it out than it is to write it out? And as we come to a close, your interest may have been piqued by this balanced conversation we had today. So if you have a desire to get greater clarity and make better decisions faster in your life, I've put together a trifecta of prompts to help. So you can join the VIRIVERSE email experience at the link that you can see in the chat, or that you'll be able to see in the show notes after the fact. And you'll receive prompt 1 of 3 from me tomorrow, as soon as you sign up there today. So back to you, Chance, to close us out.
Thank you, MCK. Of course, extending a thank you for hosting such a great conversation and exercise. And of course, Viridescent wants to extend a very special thank you to our anonymous changemaker for being willing to be vulnerable and be a part of today's conversation and be so open and honest about real challenges in a real life. The journey of realizing that the individual needs to be in a more sustainable place is a path to the next part of the journey, that it brings others aboard with us. So riffing off that kind of feeling of alone insight that MCK shared and that the Changemaker brought us to today, for anyone that's listened today or on the podcast, if you want to take a more active role from the moon of QSADA and participate in this observation adventure with us, just see your show notes for how to get in touch. And for those of that sign up for the email experience, we'll also reach out there too. Lastly, thank you just everyone for joining us and helping support a changemaker just like you. We will see you all next week. This is your Vera Vigilantes signing out with a little nature and music as always. Later, friends.